Hey everyone, welcome back to Dungeon Brew. We are continuing our conversation about Thieves Guilds, and today we're getting into crime and punishment. Stay tuned.
Welcome to Dungeon Brew.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Dungeon Brew. We are talking about crime and punishment today on our video. We've been talking about Thieves Guilds for quite a bit, and the Thieves Guilds, one of the major factors that I think many GMs struggle with is the idea of how to deal with a character when they finally get caught by the authorities doing something that they're not supposed to be doing, and it ends up being this. I think it actually becomes an issue because many GMs start trying to think of it in terms of our modern punishments, which usually is incarceration in some way. And we wanted to talk a little bit about more appropriate punishments for crimes and still making those punishments feel dangerous or eventful without making them to the point where it is ruining a character for a player. So, Joshua, do you want to get started on that?
Yeah, so by all means, if you have a Thieves Guild existing in a town and they are going around engaging in activities that are contrary to what the law dictates, then there should be some sort of consequence for engaging in those. So if they're smuggling, if they're killing people, if they're engaging in larceny, there has to be some sort of consequence to this. And just to support what you're saying, I think that modern games also don't give you good creative options on how to handle this type of thing in gameplay, and many of us as GMs kind of lean back on that. Oh, I'm gonna take your characters and toss them into a prison, and they have to talk to the guard or dig their way out with a spoon or in some other way escape the jail cell they've been put into, and that is just boring.
I appreciate you pointing that out, because immediately my mind jumps to like Skyrim, which is basically, oh, you accidentally killed a chicken because you weren't paying attention and you used your voice power and murdered a chicken. Aggro's all the guards. They come up to you and say, basically, you need to come to prison with us. And so then you are left with like, okay, I can either try and bribe the guard, which you can only do if you're in the Thieves Guild, or I can go to prison, or I can fight them to the death because I accidentally killed a chicken. And it feels, like I said, it feels bad, which is the same thing, incidentally, that happens in Baldur's Gate 3. Like, almost that exact same combination of events. And once you're incarcerated, then you can try and break your way out, or you can just sit in there until you're eventually freed. And that's it. Like, that's the totality of what crime and punishment is in most video games.
Yeah, it's bribing people or it's going to jail or fighting to the death, like you said. But to be honest, that's not very reflective of what would have occurred during medieval times. Putting people in jail cost a lot of money during those times, and I understand that some people may be playing a TTRPG that doesn't exist within that medieval setting.
Right.
But oftentimes, that's kind of where our mind goes to. And there's a lot of other creative options that you can utilize that will add to that gameplay experience. It'll be memorable for your characters.
Yeah, rehabilitation wasn't really much on the table during that time period. It wasn't the idea, which I mean, that's debatable now.
Still, if it's on the table now. Yeah.
But it has that idea, like that idea of you're going to prisons because you're a danger to society so that you can go back out and you can be a productive member of society. That's kind of the idea. The punishment is there, but whatever. Point is that we're talking about, okay, so what other things can we do besides incarceration? Or incarceration is definitely on the table, but like you said, it's probably not the first and foremost that is usually used. I feel like incarceration is primarily used for political figures, nobles, those types of things that have value to them, that are it would cause more trouble to kill them than it would to set them free, or they're awaiting some kind of payoff in order to release them. So they're holding them for ransom. That's the word, ransom. So that is usually, I think, where a lot of incarceration ends up during this time period.
Yeah, and I was going to say, movies back that up as well. When you watch any medieval movie and you see these individuals that are being thrown into a jail cell, it's usually because there's some sort of political statement that needs to be made by capturing that individual, holding them hostage, having a trial. Like, you're making a statement as a ruler by holding that person. In most cases in your games, that's not going to be the case. And I do want to say that there's like a couple of basic things that I think our mind goes to. This is not our gold content. This is just stuff you guys probably already know. But yes, there is fining, so there can be money that has to be paid for breaking laws. So that's a really basic thing to kind of apply if need be. There's also like public lashings, which I think all of us are familiar with that idea of like, I'm going to put you in the stockades, I'm going to beat you with a switch, and then let you go for a little bit, and then the imprisonment. And I think those things are like your vanilla options when it comes to a GM and what it is that you can do. But I know you have a lot of other creative ideas to share.
Right, which I do want to touch on those briefly. Like fining, for instance, fining can be interesting because it can be a variable value, right? It doesn't necessarily mean like, which again I think is typical of our own ideas of what we currently do for fines. If you speed, you get a ticket, and you get a ticket based on how fast you were going, and usually like the state you're in. What I usually use is I use fining where it either has to do with if you were caught thieving, for instance, you might be fined for like double the value of the item. So if you get caught stealing food, it's not really that much. Like you're getting fined a few copper pieces, maybe a silver piece, something like that. If you get fined stealing gems that are worth thousands of gold, you might be held for much, much more than that. And in the same way, if you are caught engaging in, as a black market, like doing black market work or a fence or a smuggler or something like that, you might be fined for the value of the goods. You might also be fined for various crimes based off of what they consider your daily wage to be, which as a thief they wouldn't really know, but they would go, you're a commoner. And because you're a commoner, you're going to be fined this amount. Whereas a noble might be fined more because they have more money available to them. And you can use this kind of variations in the fining, which I think also helps you as a GM to kind of scale with level a little bit too. Because then you could look at something like, low levels, they're stealing mundane items, not worth a lot of money. High levels, they're stealing high value items. And if they get caught, they're getting fined more money.
And then the last one on there is the flogging, which I think that you can, again, have additional consequences to. Depending on what you take is how long you spend in the stockades or how many lashes you get or what you get lashed with. And having this have a direct impact to the character's constitution, how long it takes them to heal, maybe scarring that takes place as a result of that, which can all impact the character during the course of gameplay.
Right. So, and for some of these things, they can be very minor. And I have an entire list of punishments that I created and that I use for the games in which we do this type of thing, which has been a deterrent in and of itself, I've got to say. It's very rare that you guys actually get caught for crimes, but I have them, and I have a list for things that we use, which we're not going to go through the entire list because you don't want to listen to me just read an entire list, for the next 10 minutes. But some of the more interesting options are things like birching, which is, just basically you're being switched in public, and these are usually public things because they're meant to be deterrents. And being birched, it just is like you take some damage, like 1d4, 1d6 damage. It's more of a deterrent because people are seeing it happen. So it's going to affect your reputation. It's going to affect your ability to continue to engage in the type of work you want to do, which is, incidentally enough, something else that can be done within the Thieves Guild. If you're caught committing violations of whatever the statutes are in the guild, they would do the same thing. They would birch you in public. In public meaning in the public space for the Thieves Guild. They would force all the other thieves to attend and watch you be birched so that everybody can see what happens whenever you violate a rule or you do something against the code of the guild. Some of the other options here, which you talked about, flogging. Flogging is a more extreme example, and the way I like to do this is it actually institutes constitution damage, and constitution damage is something that will heal over time. So it would take you off the streets, or it would take you out of the normal role for a period of time, and it's like between 1 and 10 lashings, and each lash reduces your constitution score by 1. You just have to be careful with this as a GM, because if you have somebody with an 8 constitution and you assign them to 10 lashes, you've just killed them. So keep that in mind when you're talking about this. But it also is something that, like I said, would kind of keep them out of the running for a period of time as well. So I don't want to, like I said, I don't want to get into just reading off a list of these, but I think that it's important, like I said, from the GM perspective, to kind of think about how you're implementing some of these punishments and where it's appropriate, and making sure your players are aware of how you're instituting the punishments in game.
Yeah, I would agree with that. Sorry, I got caught up by you saying how I like to flog people. Like,
yeah, I enjoy it. It's something that I work on.
So another thing that kind of goes along with both of those, which has to do with, harming the character in some way or leaving a lasting impression, also has to do with branding, which I know is a very popular thing that we've utilized in our games. A thief might have to have a brand put on his cheek, or on his wrist, or on his hand, or in some sort of location that might be hard to cover, in order to label them or mark them as a thief in some way, so that people can recognize him even after the punishment has been delivered. And I think this is a really effective thing to do. It can also make it, again, interesting for gameplay, because you may have to use a disguise kit, or wear gloves all the time, or do something to hide the marking that has been delivered to you, so you can continue to engage in activity without being recognized for the thief that you are.
Right, which again, like where the brand appears, have to do with the crime as well. So if you're caught stealing, you might have a brand on the hand you were caught stealing with. If it's a more extreme version where it's like you've been branded already, and maybe they're going to brand you on your forehead, which again, these are things that change the character, but they're mostly a story element. There's no physical harm to the character. I think the brand in the middle of the forehead maybe will a little bit extreme, but like you said, the one on the hand is one that then becomes part of the character. It becomes part of basically what is going on for that character in the long term, and how they interact with other people. It can result in penalties to charisma checks and things like that when they're trying to interact with people, especially people who are outside the guild or outside of their line of work. So I think that there can be a lot of interesting story elements that arise from that type of activity, or that kind of punishment.
And I think the interesting thing here, too, which you kind of hinted at, it has to do with the particular city that the government, or it could even, like if it's coming from the Thieves Guild, in terms of what solutions they've come up with that is most cost-effective and, what's the word I'm looking for? It keeps people from committing crimes. What's the word I'm looking for? I know it's right
Deterrence?
there. Yes, and in the best deterrent for their particular city. And so, and it could also have to do with industry. Like one of my favorite consequences you have is the inhalation of fumes as a consequence. Because let's say that you have a city that runs off of a mine or an industry where there's a lot of smelters, and somebody steals something. It's like, this is what we have ready access to. I'm going to go put you in front of the fumes and have you inhale these things. It's going to bring you about a sickness or a disease, or harm your lungs, or permanently reduce your con, or have some sort of effect that is not only a huge deterrent, but it's what we have on hand. In fact, I ran a Hawkhurst campaign where their punishment, because they're a subterranean city, is to put people in the sky tower that goes right above the mountain, that essentially has like a magnifying glass that burns you. It's like sitting into a tanning bed for far too long, and they sit you up there and have you essentially be burned and have your skin tanned, so that when you come back down, everyone knows you did something wrong, because you should be pale.
Yeah, I love that. I love that idea of there is a visible mark, which eventually, like, that would kind of go away. Eventually, you would return to your normal coloring over a period of time, but it's like we're leaving you up there until you're a nice bronze color.
Yes.
And it's like the degree of your crime determines how tan you have to get. You're like, I don't tan, I just burn. This is terrible. But so some other options here, because we were talking about fining. So if you can't afford the fine, a couple other options are hard labor. So it's like you're being charged for 5 silver pieces. Well, now, because you couldn't afford to pay the 5 silver pieces, you're assigned to hard labor until you pay off your fine, which is kind of the same thing as ancient slavery, where you would sell yourself into slavery in order to be able to afford to live, basically. And then whenever you had paid off your value to your owner, then you would be set free, because slavery was not traditionally something that was permanent. But that might also be something that occurs within the city, where you are forced to into servitude for a period of time until you have paid off your fines. Which, again, these are kind of these are more permanent or more lengthy style punishments, so there you have to consider whether or not those are going to be appropriate for your style of gameplay. If you're in a fast-paced, action-packed style game, you can't really sentence somebody to hard labor for the next 6 months in order to pay things off. But if you're talking about a little bit slower paced game, and you have a thieves guild where people are doing jobs and blah blah blah, you would say, okay, you've been assigned to hard labor, you're going to be there for the next 2 weeks. In the meantime, everybody else is doing jobs, and whenever you come back out, then you're able to basically rejoin the guild and pick up where you left off, which again works for probably smaller groups versus larger groups, those types of things.
And depending on how dark your game goes, I mean, you can go to extreme things so that there is death or permanent maiming, like having a hand chopped off in the course of gameplay. But again, as a GM, you have to consider what the implications are of that, especially if your characters have no way of finding a way out of that solution. I mean, if you're willing to have a hand taken from a character, I make sure your characters know.
Your players know.
Yeah, your players know what's in store for them.
Right, which I think is another important thing when you're talking about things like assassinations. Because obviously, things like, if you're caught trying to assassinate someone, or you're caught assassinating someone, most likely the penalty for that will be some kind of death. Whether that's drowning or firing squad or whatever it is, eventually it's likely that that would result in death, and so players who are willing to engage in assassination missions should be aware of that. And you always have, and this, I think, going back to like your typical generic fantasy style settings, there's always you've been caught for a crime, but instead of punishing you, I recognize that you have value, so I'm going to make you go do a mission for me, which is fine. I just feel like it's just expected, At a certain point, it's like, well, why can't we work something out? It's like, why do you think you're special? You're not special. Go take him and put him on the horse.
Yeah, I never run a character who's like acquiesces to that anyway. Like, if I'm caught for a crime and you're like, I'm gonna have you go do something, I was like, yeah, I'm gonna do that thing.
Yeah, there was which I don't think you've played it yet, but there was a thing like that in Starfield where I accidentally, I didn't realize that I had contraband on my ship, and they immediately grabbed me and they were like, hey, we're going to we caught you, but we're gonna make you go on a mission for us. And I was like, nope, I'll just do the time, no thanks.
Yep.
Because I don't want to do it.
That's where I'm at. That's where you guys need to be. I need to be firm rulers of your cities. If that character is caught stealing, you break him on the wheel, you burn him, you behead him.
Yep.
Don't put him to work.
So I will do a quick list here towards the end of the video. So if you've stuck around this long, I'll kind of run through a list of some of the punishments that I have on here, so everybody can look at them, and you guys can kind of see some of the options and kind of get some ideas for this. Like I said, I don't want us to just sit here and read these to you, but please enjoy. And if you like the content on the channel and you want to support us, please like and subscribe, hit the notification bell, share our videos so that we can get a little bit more activity, and we'll see you in the next video.
Judge and brew.